Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me now? Are you getting audio now? Okay, so I know exactly what the problem was. The problem was that I'm a cunt. You so before I came on screen, the thumbnail was up on screen, and the reason that like I do that and other people do that is because when you click go live on YouTube, you don't really know exactly when it goes live. Sometimes it goes live and then it sends you the notification like a few seconds later. So you just have a couple of seconds of you like staring at your laptop, like mouth breathing, which doesn't look good. So usually, or some, people put the thumbnail up and then you can go live, you're live, then you change the thumbnail and you know exactly when people can see you. And when I do that, I put my mic on mute so that you can't hear me breathing or anything while the thumbnail is up and I'm not on screen. And I just forgot to take myself off mute. So that's proper fucking basic. I'm just a fucking idiot. But anyway, we digress. Let's move on from the fact that I just made a very, very basic blunder. But I'll put it down to the fact that I haven't done one of these in... I'm not actually sure when the last live stream was. I think it was the David Pierce one, which I don't know, maybe that was like 2 months ago or something. It was a while ago. I think it was even during winter, maybe. But yeah, anyway, it's been a while anyway. So I've got a couple of things that I want to go through before we actually get into the bulk of what the stream today is going to be about. So just to give people, and I'll go into more detail when we actually get onto the documentary we're going to be watching, because that's what we're going to be doing. But basically, this stream, as you can probably tell from the title and stuff, so we're going to be watching this documentary that's out. I think it's been out for a while. I'm not actually sure how long, but it might have been out for quite a while actually, called BirthGap. And it's basically about, so straight off the bat, it's not about antinatalism in a philosophical sense, but it's about it's about demographics basically. It's about this this talking point or narrative, or however you want to put it, that's come around recently in mostly conservative circles from what I've seen, about population collapse. And I think it's going to be interesting. It's basically like, what would the implications be if antinatalism caught on like wildfire and people just did stop having kids? Like, what would the implications be of that in like an anthropocentric way? I have, just for full disclosure, I haven't seen the documentary yet. This is the first time I'm going to be watching it, but I've watched interviews with the guy who made it, Stephen Shaw. And yeah, but we'll get into all of that a bit later. Before that, I want to go over two things. So the first thing is, so as you'll probably know just from me putting the link in the description of my videos, and I sometimes promote it on the Twitter and on the community tab. But we've got a supporter community over on Discord. So you join it through a Patreon, and you then get a link to join a Discord. And there's a, at the moment, small community of us. And in that Discord, you can get access to certain perks. So basically, running this channel costs me a certain amount of money in terms of subscriptions to things, the initial investments of buying the camera and stuff like that, and yeah, to help me cover my costs over the long run, and also to help grow things, so to be able to invest in new equipment and stuff like that. yeah, it's a way of helping me cover my costs, basically. So it's not in any way like a for-profit thing. Um, I mean, even if I wanted it to be a for-profit thing, like I wouldn't be making profit at the moment anyway with the amount that's coming in. So it's purely just to cover costs, and any surplus that does come in. So if I receive like more than I need to run stuff, then that money will just sit there until I need, something new to, I don't know, like a second screen or headset or something like that I choose to invest in to sort of branch the channel out or whatever. You get what I mean? So if you want to do that, you can then join the Discord, and you get a whole range of perks. And the reason I'm bringing it up now is because one of the perks is you get access to this exclusive live stream channel where you can, when I go live, I'll be checking that channel, and you can put your questions and comments in that channel, and they get priority, because the live stream chat on YouTube, often it's hard to keep up with and stuff like that. So you can put them in there, I'll see them, and then I will treat those questions as a priority. Another way you can do it is if you don't want to join the supporter group community on Discord, you can tap the link in the pinned comment and send a little message via there with a tip. So that'll then it'll come up on screen for me, and I'll be able to see it, and I'll treat it as priority as well. So I think that's it in terms of that. The other thing was I got a little very short story to tell, which I thought was like quite interesting, so I thought I'd share it. And then we can get into the actual like body of the stream. So I think it was last weekend, so about a week ago, I came back from a short holiday, a couple of days, just a long weekend, and it was down in Cornwall. So I don't know how many people who are watching are from the UK or know the UK, but there's an area of the UK called Cornwall in the southwest, and it has very, picturesque beaches and stuff like that. And there's a group of us that go down every year. It's a group of vegans. We know each other through doing activism and stuff. And on that trip, there was, I think, maybe sort of between 10 and 15 people. And like 5 or 6 of us are also antinatalists as well. So it's a nice kind of group, especially if you're antinatalist. You have, we're not a majority, but you have a decent group of people there who properly understand you. So it's nice, and also it's surprising as well. Like especially vegan antinatalists are such a rare thing globally. It's surprising to have 5 or 6 of them on one holiday. But it was cool. And there was a few of us, just 4 of us, one of the mornings went on a walk along the cliffs. And I was one of them. And the other 3, anyway, so there were 4 of us, and we were walking along, and one of them, who I won't say her name, but for the sake of argument or whatever, I don't need to use a fake name, but she turned to me and she said, Lawrence, I actually watched one of your videos and you convinced me to be antinatalist. And I said, that's cool. Like, which video did you watch? And it was the Why Am I an Antinatalist video, the one of me sitting in a park just talking to camera. And we were talking about that for a bit. And then this guy who was also walking with us, he turned to us and said, like, what is this thing, antinatalism? Like, he'd never heard of it before. And so we explained it to him, and he was giving pushback. Like this group that we go on trips quite regularly, the same group. And one thing about this group is that everyone on it loves debating all different ideas. So we've debated antinatalism many times, This guy had just happened to not been involved in any of those debates before. So we had this conversation about antinatalism, and he was like considering, he was giving pushback because it was an idea he'd never come across before, and it was an interesting conversation, at least for me, because now with what I do, most of the people I actually come across are either antinatalist or they already have an opinion of it. Usually if they're not an antinatalist, it's like a against position. So it was actually quite refreshing to talk to someone who like literally never heard of it before. It was quite interesting. I hadn't actually done that for a while. It was an interesting conversation. And then we get to where we were trying to get to, and the others had driven there. So we were all back together as a big group. And because he was kind of still mulling this topic over, he basically said to the group, right, everyone, people who think having kids is good or want kids over here, and people who think having kids is not so good and are not going to have them over here. And so he basically got people, he wanted to see who was in what camp, basically. And I thought, well, okay, all of the antinatalists are going to be over here, like 5 or 6 of us, and everyone else is going to be over there. And it was so interesting because people sorted themselves into their groups, and on the side of like pronatalism, out of a group of 10 to 15, there was one person, and it was him. So this like exercise that he did really backfired on him, because basically everyone was on the against side, and there were I think 2 or 3 people in the middle of like I don't know, and then he was the only one in the pro side. So it was like really interesting to see, and I was just thinking, like, there is no other group in the world that goes on regular trips, and if you ask them that question, that is the result. So yeah, I found that like really interesting. And it's a good group to go with, because you have very strong personalities in that group, like many of them all holding like different opinions on many different things. So it's good if you have an opinion that you hold strongly, like antinatalism, you chuck it in there, you will get a lot of pushback, a lot of challenge. So it's a really good place to, it's a really good group to, you go away, you're in a nice place, but you also get your ideas challenged and stuff. So it was a good time, and I thought that story was quite interesting, because it's just funny how he obviously thought that everyone was going to be on his side, but he ended up being the only one. Cool. So that was story time. Cool. So I'm just checking if there's any chat or anything. I'll just say, before I do the spiel about, like the proper spiel about what we're going to be getting into, I'll just see who's in the chat. So Christian's in the chat. Hey, Christian. Geo, username here. Very inventive name. PK Braveen. Good to see you guys. If I know there are more people watching who haven't put in the chat, but if you're watching and you haven't put in the chat yet, say hi in the chat. It would be nice to see who's watching and say hi. But okay, so the topic of the live stream. So the main topic is BirthGap, which is a documentary by this guy Stephen J. Shaw. And let me give a bit of background about where this documentary comes from, the climate it sits in, how it came to my attention, all of this sort of stuff. So, hey Naveen, hey Clear Mind. So, I can't remember what year it was, but I think it was in the latter half of the 20th century. A book came out called The Population Bomb, and it was basically about overpopulation. Basically, it was basically calling to attention: the population is growing too fast, it's going to be too big, or it's too big now, and we are not going to be able to we're not going to be able to live in a way that is feasible, basically. And so we need to think about living in a way where there are not as many people on the planet. And this book was very famous, very influential, and recently there has been a change in the discourse on population. I've noticed it in the past couple of years. I'm sure the discourse has changed in many ways for a lot longer, because I'm just not involved in these conversations about overpopulation. So I'm sure there's elements of it that I am not privy to, obviously. But in the popular sort of discourse space online, this is a discourse that has reared its head again in the past couple of years, I would say. But it's the opposite way round. So now the discourse is that there's going to be a population crash or population crisis or population collapse, all of these sorts of these buzz terms. And I've noticed it being more in conservative circles. So I'll actually share my screen now, because I want to show you some of the things that have been circulating around this. So, like I said, this discourse about population crash, birth rates going down, birth rates plummeting, this tends to be discussed in what I've seen mainly conservative circles, but also the circles of people who refer to themselves as like truth seekers, truth tellers, all of these sorts of people, like free thinker TM, whatever. So one example of the sort of free thinker group, the sort of anti-establishment group that talks about this is Russell Brand. So he was talking about this, but it mainly seems to be conservatives. So actually, to be fair, this is really not helping my point because these are all sort of free thinker type channels. But you also have Trigonometry, and this is actually the guy who did the documentary. So the documentary not Birth Strike, that's a fucking antinatalist thing. The documentary BirthGap was by this guy, Stephen J. Shaw, and he did an interview with Trigonometry here, which we're actually going to watch a clip of later after we've watched the actual documentary, because in the documentary they don't actually specifically mention antinatalism as far as I'm aware. Again, I haven't watched it, but I don't think it mentions it. But in this documentary they do specifically mention antinatalism, but I actually think they just completely misunderstand what antinatalism is, so we'll get onto that later. You also have, this is a different person, but Trigonometry also interviewed this person about population. You have GB News, who's got Stephen Shaw on. GB News, for anyone who doesn't know, they're a right-leaning conservative news outlet in the UK. And you also have Jordan Peterson, who's maybe the biggest person talking about this. So his interview has got 1.8 million views on this. And he's talking to Stephen J. Shaw as well. And what you can see, actually, one of the things which a few people have noticed in the antinatalist sphere, because I've spoken to a few people and a lot of people in the antinatalist sphere are aware of this documentary and this sort of discourse going on. And one thing to note is that what's commonly referred to in this discourse is unplanned childlessness. So they aren't necessarily talking about child-free people, I think, though I think that is part of the conversation. But Stephen J. Shaw, what I've seen him talking about is he specifically wants to focus on unplanned childlessness, people who want children or are open to having children but didn't get the opportunity, or life passed them by, or for some other reason against their will they weren't able to have them, something like that. So yeah, you've got Jordan Peterson, who's on the conservative side. You've also got then people like Chris Williamson, who is sort of like, the Jim Bro 2.0 sort of type person. Again, Jordan Peterson. I think I've made the point by showing you you guys like the discourse that's going on around this. So this is something that's been widely discussed, especially in conservative circles. And actually, I didn't get something up to put on screen, but Elon Musk is maybe maybe the most famous person who talks about this. Elon Musk, for anyone who doesn't know, pretty sure he's the richest man on earth, right? And he runs Twitter, SpaceX, Tesla, and he talks about quite regularly population collapse, birth rates declining. He thinks this is one of the, I don't think I'm misquoting him here, but I think he thinks it's one of the most pressing issues of our time. So there's some pretty big names behind this sort of discourse of population collapse. And one other interesting thing is you're actually getting like semi-influencers popping up specifically around this topic. So when I say semi-influencers, I don't think these people are influencers to the point where they're like mega famous, but they are basically building somewhat of a brand around having kids within this wider context of the birth rate is too low, and so they're doing their part, basically. So this couple, they are called Simone and Malcolm Collins. They've done some interviews around this, and I don't want to say too much because I don't know an insane amount about them, but from my understanding, they've committed to, I think they might have committed to try and have as many kids as possible whilst they're still fertile as part of helping balance birth rate decline. So yeah, they're sort of building this brand around this idea. But yeah, I don't want to say too much about them because I don't know too much about these specific people. I've just seen them being interviewed a couple of times. And maybe at some point I'll be able to get them on and have a conversation with them, which will be interesting. Yeah, so I think, let me just go back to this. So I think that's a bit of background to this documentary. So you've got this background way back in the 20th century of the population is going to, blow up. Birth rates are too high. There's going to be too many people. And then it's switched to birth rates are too low. Population is going to collapse. We have a lot of people now, but in the near future, we're not going to have enough people. All of this sort of stuff. And within that sort of context comes this documentary. So I think that's probably enough said about the background and the context. I think we can probably start getting into the documentary. So before we start, I'm just going to quickly look in the chat, see if anyone's put anything that needs responding to. Okay, cool. So, let's get into it. So the documentary is about 50 minutes, so it's not too long. And then afterwards, if we're feeling up to it and we're not like annihilated, then there is a little clip which is from Trigonometry here. There is a little clip from Stephen's interview on Trigonometry that I want to have a look at because they specifically talk about antinatalism there. But yeah, please let me know if you can't hear the audio. I think I've set everything up right, so you should be able to hear the audio. But let's get into it. Just so you guys know, when I'm watching the documentary, I probably won't be checking the chat that much. So if you want to send a question or a comment or anything, use that link in the pinned comment. Or if you're already in the supporter Discord, send a message on that on the text chat that I've made for live streams. So I think without further ado, let's get into it.
Dr. Ehrlich, your main concern has been the population bomb, as you call it in your book. What hope is there?
We've got to use political processes. In the not-too-distant future, the government will simply tell you how many children you can have and throw you in jail if you have too many.
I do know that at this time, unless now we think of what America is going to be like in the year 2000, this increase in population, and do something about it to stop that pressure, we're going to reap the whirlwind. Because look at what the year 2000 will be. If the present trends continue, our cities are going to be choked with people, and they will be impossible places in which to live, and the explosions will be even worse.
If we do not, by humane means, limit our numbers, then numbers are going to be limited by more famines and shortages.
The disaster will take the form of famine, plague, or war. They're mankind's old companions, fundamentally. You just got to remember this. There's no way out of the arithmetic. There will never be 7 billion people in the year 2000.
And now a milestone for all of us on this planet today. The United Nations declared that today the world's population reached 7 billion people.
That relentless population clock just keeps on ticking and ticking.
Well, if they kept such a clock in Italy, it would be ticking backwards. The government there thinks there are not enough Italians.
Demographers warn that the shrinking population could drag the country into an unprecedented economic crisis.
Dire predictions of an overpopulated planet have been with us for centuries. What if they're just plain wrong?
Alert, the number of babies born in America last year falling to a 32-year low.
But there's already a population crisis hitting major economies across the globe.
Look at these numbers. How do you explain this decline?
You know, you've got cases like Japan where adult diapers outsell baby diapers.
The world's falling birth rate isn't on the list of major threats to life as we know it.
So there's the intro. We've already seen Elon Musk. If anyone doesn't know who he is or what he looks like, he was the last person that you saw pop up on screen. So yeah, it seems like one thing that I was quite appreciative of, even though I'm sure this documentary is going to put forward things that conflict with what I think. I appreciate the high production quality, at least it seems so far. If anyone didn't catch it, at the very beginning when they were showing clips of interviews, the guy who was being interviewed was Paul Ehrlich, who was the one that wrote The Population Bomb. Just before we go forward, I just wanted to say thank you to the person who sent in a cheeky $5. You know who you are. But yeah, I'm not going to share people's names in case they don't want to, because I know some people don't want their, they don't want people to know. But thank you so much. It's really appreciated, and that will go towards helping me continue the channel and putting out what I put out. So thanks so much for that. I've also got something in the community Discord. So we've got curious if you think there is any other good media about the antinatalist topic. I recently watched Children of Men, which was really cool and seemed pretty related. I haven't actually seen that, to be fair. I need to watch that. It depends what you mean by media. So in terms of podcasts, you've got Exploring Antinatalism, Voidcast, and which is a new one. Voidcast is a new one. There's only one episode so far, and the Antinatalist Advocacy podcast, which there's only one of so far. In terms of films, there are. Now I'm going fucking blank. There are films that have an antinatalist theme, and I've completely blanked on all of them. If people can think of some, put them in the chat, because my mind's going fucking blank. But there's loads of stuff on YouTube, which is relatively high production quality. So again, it depends what you mean by media. So you gave an example of a film. I'm pretty sure Children of Men is a film. So you might specifically be meaning films, but there are things on YouTube, sort of more artistic pieces, which are antinatalist. So there's one by a guy called Truth Seeker, I think his name is, and it's just called Antinatalism Movie, I'm pretty sure. that's more of a creative video that has an antinatalist message. Yeah, I'm gonna have to defer to people putting stuff in chat because I'm fucking blanking on this one. Even though I know, I'm pretty sure I actually literally watched something the other day that has an antinatalist undertones to it, and I've completely forgotten what it is. But sorry about that. Yeah, no worries, Lenny. So Lenny's in the chat, and Lenny is one of the hosts of the Voidcast podcast. And yeah, so a bit about Voidcast. So Lenny and Carlos are now doing it, but it used to be Carlos and someone else who I forget their name. And there's a backlog. I think they did like 10 episodes previously in Voidcast, and in some of those, or one of those, they talk about films and TV series that have antinatalist themes. Lenny, you'll be able to see who sent that message. So if you have a link to that podcast episode of Voidcast where they talk about the films and TV series, are you able to send it to them? And yeah, people are putting stuff in the chat. There's also a book. There's a book. What's it called? Written by 2 authors, if anyone can remember that. Yeah, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas is a very good example. That's a short story. There's also a book, and I've forgotten what it's called, written by 2 authors. Someone will probably, in the chat, someone will know what I'm talking about. But anyway, let's get back to the documentary.
But it soon will be. Taxes are destined to soar, pension systems will become unsustainable, while our healthcare systems won't be able to cope with the ratio of old people to take care of compared to the shrinking number of taxpayers. Businesses will struggle to find workers to hire, school closures will accelerate, while social care will continually be slashed.
And they say it's an economic time bomb.
I'm worried about the birth rate. Most people think we have like too many people on the planet, but actually this is an outdated view. I think that the biggest problem the world will face in 20 years is population collapse. Collapse. I want to emphasize this. The biggest issue in 20 years will be population collapse.
Ready to be a father. After the breakup, I start everything.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think replacement rate. So the official replacement rate needed to sustain the population of a country, civilization, however you want to term it, or population, is 2.1, and the reason is because you might think, well, it takes 2 people to create someone. So when they die, surely they need to produce 2 people. So that's 1 person for each person. But actually it's 2.1 because the 0.1 accounts for basically people who don't reproduce or kids who die in childbirth. Yeah, or people who die before they have reproduced. So the people who do reproduce need to reproduce a bit above 2 children to be able to sustain the population, to account for those people who don't reproduce or who aren't able to. So, yeah, I'm sure they just put 2 in there, to make it simple. But yeah, officially it's 2.1, I'm pretty sure. Cool, let's continue. So who's this woman? She's divorced. Okay, cool. And she was in Thailand, wasn't she?
0. That's why I got very personal, very emotional because when you first know that your partner didn't want, it's quite heartbreaking. This is
my story too. Example, my husband is granted that he is a great, but you see, he still enjoy his other life, his drinking and all that.
โอ้พี่ไม่เคยรู้เรื่องเราขนาดนี้ไงโทษทีนะพี่
So I think basically those women, and I've heard that this documentary has a lot of these sort of interviews in, is they basically interview people who are examples of unplanned childlessness. So again, to put that distinction in there, there's child-free people who voluntarily choose not to create someone, and then there's people who want to create someone, but for some reason they're not able to, or they just haven't been in the right situation. And obviously people have a biological clock, and so at some point, I don't actually know the full biology behind it. I'm not sure what men's biological clocks, but for women on average it tends to be like if they haven't had a kid by their late 30s, I think it is, then the chances of them actually having a healthy, well, a baby at all, or a healthy baby with no complications is starts to drop massively. I might be slightly wrong on the biology there, but I think in principle I'm right that there's a biological clock. I'm not sure what the case is actually for men, if men are fertile all through their life, or if they also have a point where they drop off if it's later. Yeah, so obviously these two women are two cases where they would have wanted to have a child, but it just didn't work out. Which, like, we can be real as antinatalists and say that we feel sorry for those people, because it's not nice when people don't get what they want. Like, at the end of the day, we've all been dumped here, not of our own choosing. We don't always choose what we desire. Like, we often, through biology or culture, we are just instilled with this desire to create someone, which isn't necessarily our fault that we desire that. And it's a very strong desire. Often people base their whole lives around it. So when that gets torn away from someone, it can be pretty earth-shattering for them, which is not a nice thing. Like, it's not nice to see someone go through this. The question is, does alleviating that suffering that they're going through justify imposing, let's be honest, a bigger level of suffering and guaranteed death on someone else? Like, it's just sort of, I don't know, it sounds kind of harsh, but it's like, it is a you problem. Like, it's a problem you've got and you need to deal with. And, like, it may just be easy to say, oh, I'll just create someone and offload my, solve my problems that way and offload the burden onto them, because then they'll have presumably they will then have the same sort of situation where they've been caught in a catch-22, where either they're going to suffer from not creating a child, or they need to pass that thing on. So yeah, it's an unfortunate situation. It's like we've all just had this desire for, not all of us, because some people don't, but a lot of us have got this strong desire built into us from cultural biology. And if you want to do the right thing and not create someone else, it's going to cause a lot of friction and discord in your life often for people. So it is sad to see people in this state, but you've got to think about the alternative of, if they were to alleviate their situation, what would that do? And it would lead to the suffering and death of someone else. But yeah, let's see if anyone's saying anything in the chat. Okay. What's so good about Thailand that one would want to raise children there? I mean, I don't know. I've never been to Thailand, but I think people want to raise kids everywhere. Like, I don't think it's specifically Thailand. People are just, like, people can be in the shittest situations and recognize that and still want to raise a kid there, which, like, is bizarre to me. But yeah, it's just that desire is so strong. Wherever they're going to be, they're going to want to do that. Cool. Okay, let's continue.
Why are people having so few children? The more I read about falling birth rates, everything was negative. You enter a downward spiral. As you have fewer and fewer children, you have fewer and fewer future mothers, which in turn goes on and on and on. And no society in history has been known to come out of that spiral.
The speed of population decreasing is going to speed up. And you call it collapse. I agree with
accelerating
that.
collapse. And then common rebuttal is like, well, what about immigration? Like, from where?
If Elon Musk had his way, it would be from Mars. So I've actually just forgotten what I was going to say. Nope, it's gone. It will come back to me.
I started the BirthGap project in Cambridge, Massachusetts in...
Wait, let me just rewind a bit because it was something they said triggered something in me to say.
The speed of population decreasing is going to speed up. And you call it collapse. I agree with
accelerating
that.
collapse. And then common rebuttal is like, well, what about immigration? Like, from where?
No, it's gone. I can't remember what I was going to say. It will come back to me at some point.
I started the BirthGap project in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 2016 after seeing data for Germany showing there are only half the number of children there now compared to 50 years ago.
What are we going to talk about today?
Global population collapse, what else? A fun topic. How's the other? As a lifelong learner, I had been brushing up my skills on data science. My goal had been to find an explanation to one of the world's great mysteries. Why did the number of children being born in Italy, Japan, and Germany fall so rapidly?
That's what I was going to say. So the thing I was going to say is that they will probably get into it because it seems very relevant to this documentary, so I'd be surprised if they don't. But one interesting thing, and there may be some people in the chat who know more about this than me, in fact there definitely will, is that there are many countries around the world now that are actually seeing a declining birth rate to the point where they're below replacement rate. And two famous examples are South Korea and Japan, and also Italy. But there are others as well. And what's been happening is that many governments have now been trying to institute pro-natalist policies where they incentivize people to have children. And I think pretty consistently they have had little to no effect. And I'm not sure why that is. It would be interesting to talk to someone who does know why that is. But it's just interesting that even with incentives, a lot of people will not have a child or extra children. And that's interesting. I don't know why that is. Maybe they will get into it in this documentary, but I think that's worth noting and having in the back of your mind that actually, whilst we look at the problem they're presenting, governments have been trying to get people to reproduce more, and it doesn't seem to be working. And so it's like, even if you just remove antinatalism for a minute and you just say, okay, we've got this problem of population collapse, it doesn't seem to be the case that pro-natalist policies are going to work, at least the ones that have been tried so far. I don't know if there's going to be some magic, bullet policy or whatever that's going to be thought up, but they don't seem to work at the moment. And so I wonder if the discourse around this is going to shift somewhat in the next decade or so to trying to prevent population to collapse, and which is the discourse at the moment, and shifting to how do we adapt to that, and how do we adapt to trying to maintain the same quality of life and standard of living for people, but at a lower level of population. That would be really interesting to see if the discourse changes there, because at the moment it seems like all the discourse around this topic I've seen is about raising awareness about the issue and trying to prevent it by promoting people have more children. But I wonder if at some point they will realize that they're probably not going to be able to stop this problem, and so instead they shift to embracing it and saying, okay, well, how can we actually use this as an opportunity to, at a smaller population level, have a smaller amount of people with a higher quality of life? Is that possible? Is that something we can adapt to? So it'd be interesting to see in the next decade if the narrative on this changes.
at the exact same time. Whether data can help answer that question or not, one thing's for certain, with this trend having spread across the entire industrialized world and beyond, we're all going to notice. Due to globalization, a worldwide cascade of shrinking economies will affect all nations, including the US. But it's not just economic issues. Societies with low birth rates are destined to have a burgeoning number of older people to support. Humanity has never faced such a crisis.
For a society with a sizable population to experience continuous and very rapid population decline in a prosperous and peaceful time, it's never happened in human history. There's no precedent.
Should we be worried about population decline?
Population decline is a form of social change. Can government be a practical substitute for the family structure that we took for granted up until, let's say, like breakfast yesterday morning?
Yeah, so actually just Olga put in the chat, and this is actually quite interesting. So I don't know if they're actually going to comment on this in this documentary, but we can actually get it up. So hopefully you guys can see this. It's a bit cut off because of how I had. There you go. So I just want to bring to people's attention like why the birth rate has been declining. So this website I would recommend to people, let me just bring it down so people can see. It's called Our World in Data, and basically it has articles about a range of different things, you know, important trends and stuff in the world, and it breaks them down in terms of the data we have on them and tries to be as accurate to the truth as possible, is my understanding of this website. And they have one on fertility rates. So the global fertility rate, average fertility rate at the moment is 2.3 women. And one thing I want to show people is the bit on why, here we go, why has global fertility fallen so much? So the reason I brought this up is because Olga put in the chat that women have been liberated and no longer want to have 5 to 6 kids. And this is true. This is part of why the fertility rate has dropped. So Our World in Data say there's 3 major reasons. So the first one is the empowerment of women. So this will be women getting more access to education. So women are just better educated. They can make more decisions, more informed decisions for themselves. They can also just make more decisions for themselves because as part of women's empowerment, women were able to make more decisions that impact them rather than typically a man making those decisions. Another thing is that women have, again, part of that is that women have entered the labour force, and women have gained the vote in many places. And all of these things have contributed to women essentially being able to make more choices about themselves so that they can choose not to just be basically a baby making factory, which in a more conservative pro-natalist society could be the case, that they are expected to just have 5-6 kids or something. Another part of this is that women have entered the labour force, right? So, sorry, I don't know why I'm so gassy today. So yeah, women entering the labour force. So obviously before women entered the labour force. So women have always been part of the labour force in some way. But when I say women entering the labour force, I mean entering the labour force so that they have basically the same access to the labour force as men. You know, they do not have legal discrimination against them, that women cannot do this job, that job, whatever, blah, 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 blah. So this is the situation we have in the UK, right? When women were able to enter the labour force in that way, obviously their participation shot up. And this meant that women's time was occupied by different things than it was before. Or not necessarily different things, because traditionally they would be expected to do things like cleaning, cooking, raising the children, that sort of thing, right? And these are things that are still sometimes or commonly expected for women to do, but it's about time allocation. They will spend less time doing those things because they've entered the workforce, right? Now, when I talk about this, I'm very much talking about it from a UK perspective. So obviously the situation may be different in other countries. But women entering the workforce has meant, it's had an impact on fertility. So if traditionally women were expected to essentially just be the child bearer, and they were at home, there was nothing really taking up their time to prevent them from having kids early, right? And so women would generally tend to start having kids earlier, which meant that in their fertility window, they could have more of them. Now that women have entered the labour force, it means that a big chunk of their time is taken up in their career. And so in their sort of 20s, 30s, this is really when women are gaining, and men, but obviously we're talking about women because we're talking about the fertility rate, and the women's empowerment as part of that. So because in their 20s and 30s, women who choose to pursue a career, which at least in the UK is the majority of them, this means that in their 20s and 30s, they don't really have time to raise a kid. And if they do, it would mean that it would come at somewhat of a sacrifice to their career. And so you have this dynamic now where women are, or families are delaying having their first kid, which means that if you have your first kid later in the fertility window, if you want to have more, you're there's a limit on you because you're going to hit the hard stop of no longer being as fertile or fertile at all. So that is also one part of women's empowerment. It is not just that they can make their own decisions now, it's that there are other things at play. So cool. Sorry, I just got distracted by something. So okay, so there's women's empowerment, declining child mortality. So in the past, and still in some places today, child mortality was very high, right? Now it's massively dropped across the world. And child mortality is basically, I think the official definition, will it pop up here if I hover? No. I think the official definition is something like child mortality is when a child dies within a short time frame of being born. I'm not sure what that time frame is. I'm not sure if it's a day, a week, a year, but it's relatively soon after they're born, the child dies, and that's counted as child mortality. Because that was so high in the past, to get the same number of children, you had to have more children because you knew some of them were going to die. Whereas now it's come down, and so that means that you have to have less children to get the same amount of children because not as many will die, which is a good thing. So that's another reason that population or fertility rates have gone down. And the other one is just that raising a child the cost of it has gone up, and that's for a whole range of things. But yeah, let's go back to the documentary because I just wanted to add that because Olga put it in the chat. I thought it was a good thing to raise. Okay, so let's go back to that. So let's continue.
And that's going to be really hard, I think.
Am I right that people aren't talking enough about this?
In my view, incontestably you're correct. So why aren't they talking about it more? Well, to some degree, maybe people haven't been run over by this problem themselves yet.
Do people talk much about falling birth rates?
I don't think that people talk a lot about this. It's a minor problem, I think.
Are you worried about America's long-term low birth rates?
I don't think it's a terrible thing. Culturally, birth rates have different rising and fallings.
Are people worried about this, about not having children? Do you worry about
I don't worry. Do you worry?
No.
We don't worry
No, you
about
don't
these
worry.
things.
Mhm.
We have other things to worry about.
But is it really a problem? Is it bad for the country? No. Is it bad for workforces? We have robots. We have much more automated work.
That's very true. It'd be interesting to see what AI does to this conversation. Because AI has big implications for the workforce, for the tax system, all of this sort of stuff. So that'd be really interesting to see, because I'm pretty sure Stephen Short is planning to make, so if I just zoom down, you can see it says part 1. Pretty sure he's working on a part 2 of this documentary, which again, we'll do another live stream to watch part 2. But it'd be interesting to see, because AI has become such a big thing to talk about. It would be interesting to see if AI features in that second part, and he talks about how that would have an impact on the situation.
So why is it a problem?
What people usually don't think about, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but what is unavoidable is massive graying, massive aging of the society. And so all of these places in the world which are under substantial below replacement childbearing for decade after decade are on a trajectory not only for shrinking, but also for really massive population aging.
So you were shocked about hearing
I was really shocked. The professor told us that, our generation is decreasing, so that we need to protect our older generation. And he showed the statistics. I'm really worrying about Japanese future.
What Germany?
Let's look at Germany. This is the map.
Oh dear. Look at that.
I would not have expected this. I was not aware of this. Not at all. What's the impact of this? Huh?
Understanding population trends can be tricky, partly because it takes decades for changes to play out. Initially, low birth rates are almost undetectable except to maternity wards, but soon enough, we'll find closing schools, businesses that can't find staff to hire, and then close because they can't find enough customers. And meanwhile, the cost of providing our older generations with healthcare and pensions will continue to rise and rise as more and more people live longer and longer. To understand the scale of the problem, we just need to look at the world's falling fertility rates and how many countries have fallen below the population tipping point. Demographers call this tipping point the replacement level, when women on average are having 2 children that survive into adulthood. Today, 70% of us live in countries below that tipping point, and yet somehow our focus has remained on fears of never-ending population growth.
It's interesting, this kind of framing they put about how basically, because so far and in this discourse I haven't heard the argument be that we need to create more people because it would be good for those people, because like life is the beautiful thing, blah 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 blah, all this sort of stuff. It's more from the angle of like, if we don't create more people, the rest of us are fucked. Like, we need people to look after old people, all of this sort of stuff. And I don't know, I feel like the antinatalist response to that, or there isn't an antinatalist response to that. Obviously, different people will have different interpretations and responses, but it seems to me like the overall antinatalist response would probably be, okay, yeah, like there are going to be issues from population decline, but those are our issues to deal with. Like, why should we be creating someone and offloading those issues onto them? that just seems like using them as a scapegoat, hiding from the problem, and pushing it further down the line, because at some point humans will go extinct, at some point. And so even though they're not talking about extinction here, as part of extinction, it's likely going to be that the population will decline. So we're going to have to deal with the issue then anyway. So why push that problem onto a future generation when the current generation can just say, okay, we got this problem, and we could fob it off onto people who don't exist, but we could create them and make them have the problem. But we're not going to do that. We're going to take a mature approach and say, look, we got this problem. How can we adapt to it the best we can and try and actually turn it into a positive, where we say we have a smaller population but with a higher quality of life? Is that possible? Can we put in all of our efforts into, instead of trying to make people have more kids, putting effort into trying to embrace the problem and turn it into an opportunity? That seems like a more positive attitude that would be in line with antinatalism. But also, just more fundamentally, if you're saying we've got some old people over here that need looking after, is it not quite similar to just sort of like indentured servitude or slavery, to say I'm going to create someone just so that they can be a worker to look after those people? It just seems very, to me it seems, I don't know how to put it. I don't know if it technically meets the definition of slavery, but it's sort of essentially, it's creating someone who then has their own needs, desires, and all this sort of stuff, and saying, you now need to solve this massive problem and put a significant amount of your time into helping these old people or something like that. Yeah, I don't know if other people have reactions to it in the chat. Let me know if you've, what you guys think if you put it in the chat.
In the world of statistics, Hans Rosling is a rock and roll star. And in an era where the...
I have got to say, I've watched a lot of Hans Rosling stuff, and I do find him a very engaging speaker. Now, obviously, I don't agree with him on... Well, a lot of what he does is just present facts. And if those facts are correct and the statistics he's using are correct, then I can't really disagree with him. Now, he is a bit of one of these people who's like awry-eyed, you know, life is beautiful, this sort of thing, let's create more people, tends to be on that sort of tone. But apart from that, I do find him quite an engaging speaker. He's very charismatic. I mean, he's dead now, but when he was alive and doing his thing, he was a very charismatic speaker. I do want to read his book, Factfulness. But yeah, I am a bit, to be honest, I'm a bit of a fan of Hans Rosling. But yeah, obviously some of the things he talks about and the tone he takes conflicts a bit with how I think, but you can still be a fan of someone and conflict with them in some ways.
talk is a rapid population growth. He uses hard data to try to communicate the opposite story. Here's a clip from his film, airing tomorrow night on BBC Two.
Up to 8, and then it goes up to 9, and then it goes here. But see, it's slowing down, By the end of the century, it's becoming more flat there. And if I do...
No one could explain population trends better than the late Hans Rosling, including why our total headcount will increase for a while, despite the number of children having peaked.
Now, this will confuse you, because how can then the total population grow like this if the children doesn't increase? Where will all these adults come from? And to explain that, I will show you the world population, ladies and gentlemen, in the form of foam blocks.
Oh, foam blocks. I think I saw him once do this with toilet roll.
1 block is 1 billion. We have 2 billion children in the world. Then we have 2 billion between 15 and 30 years of age. We have 1 billion 30 to 45. We have 1 billion 45 to 60, and then we have my block, 60 years and older. We are here on top. Huh? So this is what we have today. Now, what will happen in the future? Do you know what happens to old people like me? they die. The rest, they grow 15 years older and have 2 billion children. These ones are now old, time to die. And then these ones grow 15 years older and they have 2 billion children. This one die and the rest grow 15 years older and have 2 billion children. And without increasing the number of children, without increasing the length of life, we have 3 billion people more by this big inevitable fill-up of adults, which will happen just when the large young generations grow up.
It's funny. So I used to live in Sweden, and the way that they're in their language, they don't seem to have the j sound, just, or juvenile, or jelly. Instead, they say y. So you could hear it just then. He says just instead of just. And from living in Sweden before, I kind of I have like a sentimental attachment to the way they say it wrong. It's quite funny.
Hans Rosling's building blocks explain beautifully how the world's total population is going to fill up with older people and not children. Yet before this project, I had no idea about low birth rates outside of Europe and Japan.
I would say at the moment, we can break the world down into 2 components if we oversimplify. Sub-Saharan Africa and everybody else. If we take all of the rest of the world, all of non-Sub-Saharan Africa, we're already below the replacement level. And we've been below the replacement level for a little while now.
Barring compensating immigration, no society can survive long term.
Just out of interest, because obviously this documentary is like a big international one, talking about loads of different countries. Let's see like where everyone's from in the chat. So if you are, well, if you can put something in the chat, definitely put in what country you're in at the moment or what country you're from.
Below this replacement level tipping point, and the farther down birth rates go, the faster they will decay, or to use the correct mathematical term, exponentially decay. Nations like Japan, Italy and Germany, with birth rates around 1.4 children per woman, will decay by around 1/3 per generation, meaning that in 2 generations, the underlying population will fall by over half, and in 3 generations, by 70%. But it turns out, ultra-low birth rates go far beyond these countries.
All, without exception, all industrialized countries, developed countries, have below replacement fertility.
And we know what happens with continuing below replacement fertility. What's working pretty well now, manifestly, is going to be unsustainable a generation from now if you just do the arithmetic.
It's striking, and there is no single explanation. In different contexts, you have very different stories.
But the trend started around the same time in the early 1970s.
Yes, that's amazing, the amazing thing. And in the West, this is attributed to the pill. In Japan, the pill was introduced in the early 1990s.
So it's interesting, though, that while Europe blamed the contraceptive pill for the fall in birth rates,
it's not the case in Japan.
But yet it was falling at the same time.
At the same time, yeah.
It's so difficult to describe, and it may be very different things in different places that are causing these changes.
In our culture, it's completely different. Like in Western context, about 1/3 of babies are born out of marriage. But in Japan, marriage and childbearing are closely associated. So it's very different.
And again, there is something strange. In Germany, education is fully subsidized. Completely opposite to Japan, because education in Japan is very expensive. So there are lots of contradictions.
As a statistician looking at raw numbers,
Yeah.
if you just look at that cold, you'd say the probability that there's some common driving factor is very high.
Yeah, that's that's so interesting that even in different contexts with different cultures, different economic situations, different political situations, that we're seeing this underlying trend happen in all of them. One thing I probably would say is if you go back to the Our World in Data thing, it's saying how the cost of raising a child has got more expensive, and infant mortality has gone down. Those things presumably would both be present in all of the countries that are being talked about here, you could maybe say that the cost of raising a child is not uniform, because like I was saying before, there's pro-natalist policies that are trying to subsidize the cost, but infant mortality seems to be uniformly gone right down across these countries. So maybe that is a common factor, but they're saying here that no one has found a common factor to explain falling birth rates, which is interesting. And obviously, if they made a documentary on this, they would have seen that World in Data article. So obviously they would have taken that into account. So yeah, I wonder what it is that's causing all of this. I'm not sure, to be honest. If anyone has any theories, put them in the chat.
Why is it in Japan many people have no children? Why the population's going down? Why women having so few children? Are you worried about there being so few children in Japan now?
He's in a rush. She doesn't know.
She doesn't know.
Yeah.
Samimasen, you speak English? Eigo? Okay.
Still really don't understand why Japanese people are having only 1.
That's so funny. You know, when he was approaching those people in the street, like it reminds me of doing like animal rights activism, doing street outreach, and approaching people in the street. Like you get the exact same like reaction. Obviously, it will depend on culture, but it seems like, at least from this clip, in Japan, it's the same as the UK. Like you approach someone in the street, and they're instantly like, "Why are you approaching me? Get away from me." So it's just funny to see him doing that. Like I can relate to that.
Yes. I don't know why.
Well, the weird thing is that many women want to have children, but I don't know why like the current society is struggling with low birth rate.
Young people has maybe losing some expectation for their bright futures, I think. Working long time is a very easy solution. You can so easily escape from such kind of discussions.
We're talking about why in Japan population is going down because people don't get married, people don't have children. Why?
Why? I don't know. It's taxes problem.
Tax problem?
Yes. Yes, taxes problem. I love Steven.
Did they just like go out on a bender and then include the footage from that in the documentary? That's so funny.
Just from your perspective, first of all, I mean, are you aware that in northern Italy that there is a low birth rate? Is this a surprise to you? Why here?
Yeah, I'm not really surprised about this. Yeah, maybe the people think that they cannot give a good future to the children.
So I think having a career is not easily combinable with children, especially in modern careers where you have flexible work hours, which means no one checks on your hours, but also no one caps your hours, so you can work a lot.
Pourquoi les gens avoir moins d'enfants?
Honnêtement, j'ai aucune idée.
Why? Why is this happening? I don't know. I don't know.
Maybe they think that they can live a happy life if they have the children because they have to work just to have a baby, you know?
After 50 years of unsustainably low birth rates, countries in Europe and Japan are fast becoming inverted worlds with too many retirees for the shrinking workforces to support. If we look at Italy, for example, in 2019 there were around 1 million people aged 50 who will be retiring in around 20 years' time. Then, if we look at the number of newborns who, in around 20 years' time, will be entering the workforce to support these retirees, they're less than half. Any large gap between the number of newborns and the number of people they will have to support into retirement is significant socially and economically. Given that these gaps are being caused by long-term low birth rates, I decided to call any shortfall in workers birth gaps.
I wonder if universal basic income ever comes into the conversations here. My opinion on universal basic income has kind of gone backwards and forwards over the past sort of like 5 years. I don't know exactly what to think about it. At the moment, I tend to lean more in favor of it. I watched an interview with about it recently, which was quite interesting. But yeah, obviously with universal basic income, I mean, I'm no expert, so I might be getting this wrong, but it seems like one of the problems they're talking about here is that you won't have enough young people in the workforce to be paying taxes to support the elderly people. But then that problem would presumably be alleviated heavily or solved if there was a universal basic income, because the elderly people would have a level of income to pay for private care. So yeah, I don't know if anyone here is particularly knowledgeable on universal basic income, but that would be an interesting angle for them to explore. I hope, like, yeah, in part 2, they explore a few of these things, like universal basic income, or the AI, like we were saying before. Like, it seems like AI and universal basic income could be two tools at your disposal that could actually help you embrace this problem as an opportunity. Yeah, it'd be interesting. For anyone who doesn't know what universal basic income is, it's a basic income that people would receive. So it's a public policy that governments can adopt, where every citizen of the country receives a basic income. So it's universal. Everyone gets it. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, and it's a basic income. It's paid into your account every week or every month, and you then have that to help support you. And yeah, it's something that's becoming more and more discussed. It'll be interesting to see how it fits with this topic, like how they intersect. Yeah.
I wanted to show these birth gaps on a series of regional maps. First, I coloured any regions that did have more babies than 50-year-olds green. But in regions where there were too few children being born, I used increasingly dark shades of red, with the darkest red meaning there are less than half the number of babies being born compared to the older people they would need to support. And at the centre of any region with a birth gap, I put a gaping black hole proportional to the drop in the number of children.
Oh wow, it's a big gap. That's kind of scary.
Yeah, that's crazy. Wow. Oh.
Gosh, that is major, isn't it?
It's like a shock. It's for me. It's like a shock. What are we making with our future? We are crazy. Yeah? This is not good.
It's clear. It's a very powerful transformation.
But now I want to show you, let's jump to somewhere else.
Deutschland, yeah.
Germany.
Yeah. Auf Wiedersehen. Yep.
Wiedersehen.
While this trend only affected parts of Europe 50 years ago, by the 1990s, birth gaps had spread to every corner of the continent. Even Scandinavia, a region known for its gender equality and parental benefits, wasn't immune. In Denmark, a country that offers 1 year paid leave and free education, the birth gap had reached 30%. There had even been a campaign. Do it for Denmark.
Kan sex redde Danmarks fremtid? Danmark har et problem, og der fødes ikke nok børn til at forsørge den aldrende befolkning. Skiftende regeringer har ikke kunne løse problemet, men der må være en løsning. Do it for Denmark.
But it's not only Denmark in this coveted part of the world. In 2019, Erna Solberg, Prime Minister of Norway, became the first global leader to address her people on the birth gap crisis.
Norge trenger flere barn. Vi nordmenn får stadig færre barn. For å opprettholde folketallet må hver av oss kvinner få litt mer enn 2 barn i gjennomsnitt. I dag er tallet 1,6. Da blir det relativt sett færre unge som skal bære en stadig tyngre velferdsstat på sine skuldre.
Elementary school teachers across these countries are starting to notice.
School leaders are talking about less kids coming in the next few years. So obviously we're going to have less classes and less jobs for teachers.
Do you think people should be talking about this more?
I think so, yes. I think so. Because me as a young teacher, I'm not thinking about this, but maybe I should do more.
Some countries like the UK and France, while following this same trend, had smaller birth gaps of less than 20%. But what was most concerning was some of the larger countries in Europe. Some regions of Spain had 50% birth gaps, while parts of Germany and Italy had 60% birth gaps, meaning for every baby being born there will be more than 2 50-year-olds to support into retirement. In 2016, the Italian government decided it was time to step in.
Primo Fertility Day, la prima giornata nazionale di...
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how Italy talks about this or deals with it in the future, because I believe recently they've taken a more sort of a swing towards a more conservative, traditional political situation. That's my understanding, but I'm not an expert on Italian politics or culture. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if this issue feeds into, not just in Italy, but generally, a swing to more conservative politics.
Sensibilizzazione e formazione dedicata alla prevenzione della salute riproduttiva.
They quickly found out that people don't like governments telling them to have more children. Meanwhile, businesses are starting to notice.
Di un arapallo, anche caratteristiche sono mancati, non si sono ripresi nel tempo, nel senso che...
By 2020, Italy's birth gap had reached 56%, and every country in Europe except Iceland had more 50-year-olds than newborns. But to find the world's largest birth gap, we need to look elsewhere. South Korea is winning this race to the bottom with a frightening 69% birth gap.
In other news, latest data shows South Korea's total fertility rate fell to a record low last year. Kim Il-sung reports.
South Korea's total fertility rate fell to 0.98 in 2018. The falling fertility rate comes despite the Korean government's efforts to tackle the problem, including subsidized childcare leave, free nurseries, and cash stipends.
This is what I mean. So they're mentioning here the pronatalist policies that different countries have been trying to implement, and the fact that they have not really been working, is my understanding.
From becoming a thing of the past in South Korea, a new form of parenting has taken over, raising what they're calling the dog child.
These mothers and fathers are willing to spare no expense to give their dog children only the best. Dogs are like their children, except they're a whole lot cheaper.
While in Japan, there's even an organization that lets young people try out being a parent for a day.
Wouldn't that make it worse? Like people trying out parenting for a day? Because I think often the capture of parenting is that you have your own child and you go through this whole journey with them, right? Like that is one of the reasons that people get so attached to it and look forward to it. But if you just go and visit someone else's child for a day, like you don't really build either of those two things, and you're going to see the negatives of them, like shitting themselves and stuff. So I mean, maybe it has been a beneficial, maybe it's been a policy that's helped, but that just seems like it would do the opposite to me.
そしてその場でわからないことはどんどん聞いていきます。子供が泣いた時どうするんですかとか、子供生まれて変わったことって何ですかとか、 どうしてこの人と結婚したんですかとか。
Unlike Europe, where people have the shortest working weeks and longest vacations anywhere, people in Korea and Japan are struggling with work-life balance. And that makes having children an extra challenge.
We don't have any role model in a real world. It's really rare to see how children are raised. We are just really worrying about it. We don't have specific image, so the issue is in our mind, I think.
I think in Japan, marry means end of life for the humans.
Japanese work a lot. Like, for example, until like 2 or 3 a.m. I think I'm kind of a woman who wants to pursue the career, but I feel really pessimistic about it because I feel like I should give up my career or my dreams for having children.
Despite the vast differences in culture between Europe and Japan, the world's first signs of ultra-low birth rates emerged in both places at the exact same time, and yet no one has found a connection. It's hard to accept it's just one big coincidence.
Red means low birth, black holes mean very low birth. That's pretty bad.
何なんだろうってずっと考えてるんだけど、これはね、2年経って分かんないのよ。何だったんだろうって。少子化になる原因って何だったんだろう。
He's been thinking, maybe this reason, maybe this reason, maybe this, but still he doesn't know.
Text you, Mom.
This didn't happen overnight. The data has been there for decades. What worries me is that for some countries, it may be too late already. Even if the number of babies were to increase, it wouldn't make any difference until they grow up and start working. This feels like a trap, a birth gap trap.
It's just like advocating for more people to be in wage slavery. Like, it's not a particularly inspiring message, is it? Like, we've got all these old people that are in a shit situation, like they need support. And so to alleviate that problem, not even a guaranteed solution, but to alleviate that problem, what are we advocating for? More people to be put in 9-to-5s, wage slavery. Like, even if I was pro-natalist, I would not be watching this documentary and thinking, oh, you know, I'm so inspired right now. It's, yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting if antinatalists would started to have their own discourse around this topic, but more skewed towards how can we embrace this trend as an opportunity. Because it looks like it's going to be a trend that continues, right? Like, let alone solving it. They don't even know what's causing the problem. So it doesn't seem like the people looking into this issue are at the point where they can start making what they would see as progress. But antinatalists could start to try and alter the conversation so that it skews more towards, why don't we embrace this as a potential opportunity? Yeah, it'd be interesting to see people have that discourse.
We know you're responsible for the Do It for Denmark campaign.
Yes. Well, actually, it's Eva Lundgren who is responsible for that campaign. Let me see if she's there right now.
I appreciate it.
But she'll be here in around 15 minutes.
So we'll do it right here.
Yeah, we can do it here.
So what was the inspiration for deciding to make this campaign?
At the time of this campaign, there had been small stories in the serious newspapers, not on front page, but on page 10, 12, 13, that this was a serious issue. It's not a sexy topic, really, but we can make it sexy, so yeah.
Well, you can.
Yeah, I can.
Bevis, du har undfanget et barn, og vind 3 års forbrug af Do It for Denmark.
Why is this happening?
It seems that when my mom was a young mom, her life certainly changed, but not that much. And in our time, it's more like this is a shift in your life that's serious. You have so many things you want to do. You want to educate yourself. You want to find the right partner. You want to have fun. So it seems that the time is never right.
I'm like kind of like not ready.
Hell no. Hell to the no. I'm not ready to have kids.
I've always thought about having kids. I'm also not in a place where I'm like married or pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant. So maybe in a few years that'll be another discussion.
All of my friends are head down into their career. None of them are married and none of them have kids. Everybody's just career driven. So I feel so much pressure from my family and Kenny's family. They're constantly asking us, when are you going to have kids? And just trying to explain to them, like, I just really want to establish my career first.
I'm still very much focused on, like, getting at a certain place in my career before thinking of, like, my brain cannot even think about that yet.
I've always wanted to have children.
This is what I was talking about. Like, just objectively speaking, not putting any value judgments on it, it seems like women entering the workforce has interacted with their fertility situation to the point where their time is now spent on their career rather than raising children, which has been part of the reason for declining birth rates. And you can kind of see it in these interviews. These women are saying, you know, I want to build my career first.
Always wanted to have children while I was young, but not now.
Do either of you want children?
Yeah, we definitely do. We've talked about it.
Are you ready to adopt now?
Ready to adopt in this particular moment? Like right now? Probably not.
Do you want to have kids?
That's the biggest question I've been asking myself, and ever since we got married, I've been constantly debating with myself on whether I want to have kids. Am I just blaming the environment? Honestly, I don't know the answer. Am I going to regret this if I don't have any kids?
I had to go through the motions and emotions of my life, and I think I had to do my career and do the marriage and get to the mental place of it's time.
I don't want to be that mom that misses my child's first steps because I'm away. I want to wait until I can say, you know, I can afford the time off. It's fine.
So when would that be?
That's the crazy thing. I don't know.
And now, birth gaps are coming to America. But
yeah, it's interesting because also the further back childbearing is pushed into a woman's fertility window, the less likely it is to happen, but also I believe out of the children that are born, a higher proportion also have developmental issues. So they could end up having like cognitive impairments, learning difficulties, other complications. So it's like it's sort of it's even worse for the child. I mean, they shouldn't be creating them anyway, but it's even worse. But it's also like doubly worse for the parents if you look at it from their point of view.
2020, the exact same trend saw 39 states with more 50-year-olds than newborns, with New England leading the way with a 29% birth gap. America is starting to notice
fewer babies born in America last year than at any time since Ronald Reagan. That is what's not. The birth rate is way down.
It is. Has it been a surprise to you that low fertility is becoming an issue in the US?
It took a while for us to notice. It took us a little while to catch on, but now that we have, I think people do find it worrying, and justifiably so. There's a lot of economic and public policy reasons that's going to be a big problem for the US going forward.
You've got more and more older people retiring, being supported by fewer and fewer active people working, right, who are in turn having ever fewer babies.
Right.
It's an impossible situation.
Right. The good news for America is that because of immigration, our birth rates stayed high long after everyone else's had fallen, which means that we get a preview in a way that almost no other industrialized country does, which...
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember in one of the interviews I watched of Stephen Shaw's, he was talking about how this issue is a bit like a roller coaster. Like, different countries are at different stages, but they're all heading in the same direction. So like Japan and South Korea are in like the front cart. They're at the front of the roller coaster, and then places like Germany, Italy, the UK, you know, America, they're like in the carts behind, and then you have places like Nigeria in the cars at the back, and so the countries in the cars behind can see forward to what their future may look like. So the UK and America and Italy can look at South Korea and Japan and basically say that's maybe what our situation is going to look like in the future. So it's almost like you can see the future before it happens on this issue. So that was quite interesting.
It means we can look at those other countries and say, I don't want that. What do we do?
The disturbing trend is that the fertility rate falling below the replacement level. In other words, the workforce becomes too small to support the growing retiree segment. It's a very troubling trend. As you've said before, we've seen it in Japan, Italy, and elsewhere.
Who would have thought we'd open the show with the birth rate falling to the 32-year low?
Having started in Europe and Japan at the exact same time, this trend has spread relentlessly across the entire industrialized world and beyond. Yet the only connection I could find was a common anomaly. When we say replacement rate is when the average woman is having 2 children. Of course, not all women are having 2 children. Some will be having 1, some having 3 and 4, and some, for differing reasons, having none. In very simple terms, if we exclude those having more than 4 children, to get an average of 2 children per woman, those having 3 and 4 should be in balance with those having either 1 child or none. To get an overall birth rate of less than 2, it's a mathematical necessity that those having more than 2 are outnumbered by those having none or 1. The lower birth rates go, the proportion of people having no children or 1 child must get greater and greater. The conundrum was that 1-child families were proving hard to find across all of these countries.
I have a younger brother.
I have an older brother, an older sister, and a younger sister.
I have sisters and brothers. 私が2人姉妹で。
今兄弟は4人ですね。I have one sister.
1人兄がいます。
I have a sister and brother.
I have 4 siblings, 2 sisters and 2 brothers.
And when I met those a little older, I got the same response.
You have 2 daughters, is that correct?
Yes, 31 and 33.
Well, I have 3 kids myself.
For myself, I have 2 children, okay, the daughter and son.
My assumption had been that countries with low fertility rates would have many families with only 1 child, and that assumption was held by other people too.
The reason Japan's population is declining, of course, is people are choosing to have smaller families.
But why could I not find these smaller families with only 1 child? Something wasn't right. One of the golden rules of data science is to use the most granular data possible to understand trends. What I needed was an annual measure of childlessness, but it simply didn't exist. The aha moment came when I saw the UN collects data on the number of first-time mothers and the children they then go on to have for many countries. Matching this data with total fertility rate data allowed me to calculate the missing piece in our giant population puzzle. The results connected everything. In Japan in 1974, around half of women were having 2 children, just over 1 in 5 was having 3, a similar number was having 1, and 6% were having 4 or more. Overall, the average Japanese mother was having 2.2 children, and with only 1 person in 20 remaining childless, the overall fertility rate for Japan was 2.1 children per woman. But somehow, over the next 3 short years, childlessness exploded to reach 1 person in 4. Yet the percentage of mothers...
Oh, whoa, that's like a massive... I thought he was going to say over some decades, but like over 3 years, that's a massive demographic shift.
having 1, 2, 3, or 4 more children hadn't changed at all. This wasn't a shift to smaller families. This was simply an explosion in childlessness. Wind the clock forward to 1990, and childlessness in Japan had reached 1 in 3 women, and yet the average children per mother had increased slightly to 2.3. Since 1990, this pattern has been locked in Japan, with almost no change to family structure or the 1 in 3 remaining childless. Even the proportion of mothers having 4 or more children has remained at 6%, exactly the same as 1974. Changes in demographics tend to happen slowly, but in Japan in the summer of 1974, something startling happened. Until 1973, the country was booming and the number of babies was booming. There was a new concept around, the concept of the modern apartment with kitchens, flushing toilets, and entertainment space. Apartment complexes were springing up all across Japan, and with no end in sight to the country's economic renewal, this young generation had little to worry about. But the mood was about to change. In October 1973, the global oil shock sent the country into a frenzy, and the young generation that was just settling into their new modern lifestyle suddenly had to confront sharp price rises in food and commodities and shortages of the basics. And the data shows, precisely 9 months later, across every prefecture in Japan, the number of first-time mothers plummeted and would never recover. Childlessness for 1/3 of Japanese women became the societal norm.
That's interesting. So they actually tie it to a specific event, the oil shock. That's super interesting. I wonder if it actually was to do with that oil shock, or if there was something else that just happened at that same time by coincidence. But yeah, that's really interesting.
Japan was hit hard by the oil shock. It was the world's largest importer of oil at the time, and across the entire country, many young people decided it wasn't the time to become parents. And we can see from the data, this delaying of parenthood meant that many never would. Across in Europe, Italy is described by academics as having been the worst hit by the oil shock. Family structure in Italy in 1974 was remarkably similar to Japan. On average, mothers were having 2.3 children. Childlessness was even less in Japan, with only 1 in 30 people having no children, meaning that the overall fertility rate was 2.3 children per woman. Wind the clock forward only 3 years, and we find just like Japan, childlessness exploded from 1 in 30 people to 1 in 5. By 1990, 1 in 3 people in Italy were destined to be childless, and by 2018, childlessness had reached 2 in every 5 Italians. Yet throughout this time, just like Japan, family structure hadn't changed at all. But this story isn't about Japan and Italy. Across the entire industrialized world, where we have data, in recent decades there's been no change in family structure. Across these countries in the late 1980s, the average mother was having 2.4 children. 30 years later, that number is exactly the same. And all of these nations, just like Japan and Italy in the 1970s, have transitioned to become childless nations. Nations where 1/3 or more of people will be childless for life. What is fascinating is how these rapid transformations align with major turmoil. For South Korea, it was the currency crisis of the 1990s that saw childlessness rocket to 45%.
It's interesting. So what he's saying is that a specific event happens that impacts like basically the cost of raising someone, and this causes people to have less children, or it causes more people to have no children, but then he says that is sustained, that new norm is then sustained. I wonder why it's sustained and why it doesn't change. But yeah, that's interesting. I wonder, because they were saying before that no common thing had been found across countries that had caused it. So maybe what he's saying is that each culture, each region has a different reason, and it happened at slightly different times. So for Japan, it was the oil shock. Yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, let's see.
For Germany, the fall in birth rates coincided with the 1968 student protests. And while Germany is one of the countries that doesn't provide the data needed to calculate childlessness, we can see they followed the same trend as Italy and Japan. But it's not just these countries. The exact same trend can be seen across Spain, Portugal, Austria, Switzerland, and beyond. For America and many countries around the world, it was the 2007 financial crisis. Before the crisis, the average mother in the US was having 2.5 children, and only 1 in 7 people were childless. Yet just like other financial crises around the world, within a few short years, childlessness would rocket to reach 1 in 3 people.
That's so interesting that different places are caused by different issues. It would be really interesting to just see a list of what all the different events were in different cultures and regions.
And yet during the same time, the average number of children per mother in the US increased from 2.5 to 2.6. The 2007 financial meltdown was a global crisis, and just like the US, the transition to childlessness happened in Canada, Malaysia, Netherlands, Costa Rica, Ireland, and beyond. With so many examples of crises around the world triggering high levels of childlessness, and with no example of any society ever recovering, this feels like a trap. A birth gap trap where it becomes a societal norm to start families in their 30s, when for many, it simply won't happen. I've been searching for the answer to the wrong question. Instead of asking why people are having so few children today, I should have been asking why so few people become parents today. It turns out there is no trend towards smaller families. People who do become parents are just as likely to go on to have 2, 3, 4 or more children as decades ago. It's all about having the first child. With childlessness having exploded so fast during times of uncertainty in so many countries, this doesn't feel like childlessness by choice. This feels like unplanned childlessness.
Hello, my name is Jodie Day and I'm a childless woman. And I'd like to introduce you to my tribe. This tribe has always been amongst us, but what's different about it now are the numbers. 1 in 5 women like me, born in the 1960s, turned 45 without having had children. That's double what it was for our mother's generation. It's up to 1 in 4 as what we consider the more family-oriented cultures like Ireland and Italy, and even macho Australia, up to 1 in 3 in Germany and Japan. Now, whilst these numbers don't give us any qualitative information about why a woman might not have children, a 2010 meta-analysis by Dutch academic Professor Renske Keizer would suggest that 10% of women who are childless are child-free, having chosen not to become mothers, and 10% are childless for medical reasons, including infertility. So that leaves a whopping 80% of women without children, childless by circumstance, with those circumstances varying widely, but often featuring the absence of a willing or suitable partner during our fertile years, or even an unsuitable partner. If you'd heard the heartbreaking stories I'd heard.
So a big reason why we're seeing more and more infertility these days is because of delayed childbearing. As women's eggs get older, it just gets harder to get pregnant. Imagine that these are eggs, okay? And this is a 20-year-old. So when a 20-year-old comes in and we do an ultrasound and we're able to see these 20 follicles, I tell them this is great news. You're 20. You have all these 20 eggs, and this is for this month. And next month, you're going to get another 20 eggs. Except that when a woman is 20, not all her eggs are good. For every 5 eggs that she has, as young as she is, for every 5 eggs that she has, maybe 3 of them are good. Those are the orange ones. And even a 20-year-old, as healthy and as young as a 20-year-old is, 2 of those eggs out of 5 might not be good. This is a 20-year-old. This is a 45-year-old. You see how things have changed between 20 and 45. Now, 45-year-olds still have good eggs, but these are hard to find. It's how nature does its job.
Even though there are some amazing technologies today, like egg freezing or embryo.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So that's like what I was saying. You know, the more you delay it, the harder it is, but also the more bad eggs, as he put it. Like you know, presumably that's more complications, more birth defects, more cognitive impairment.
Freezing to help women delay this childbearing time in their life. I don't think that either the media or what you hear from other people always really explains the depths of how much struggle there really could be.
Generally, this treatment required several cycles, several trials, and as a doctor, it's hard to describe how I'm feeling just seeing those patients who have to give up that treatment after having a hard time mentally, physically. Actually, fertility treatment is very hard.
So giving up.
Just want to say hey to a few more people. So hey Brecken, hey Summit, hey Dee and Music Junkie. Who have I missed? Shujat. Just a few more people who have joined. And Edgelord. Fucking legend, Edgelord.
Must be horrendous for men and women.
Yes.
When a celebrity conceives late in life, reproductive life, we probably know it's an egg donor, or it's possible that she froze embryos a long time ago. It's definitely a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, a miseducation of the public.
I literally wake up every single morning. I get emotional and I bless my children because I just feel very, very fortunate that I was able to have them.
I'm someone who married at 37 and had always thought I would have kids, and then it turned out I wasn't going to. And I think it can be a tremendous source of unhappiness.
For me, it wasn't a decision. I don't remember a time when I said, okay, I'm not going to have a family.
It would have helped if I'd known it was grief, or if the doctors and therapists I consulted about my life-wrecking distress had known, but they didn't. Grief is a language that this lost tribe speaks fluently.
Yo pensaba que tenía tiempo, que mi década entre los 30 y los 40 iban a ser suficientes como para que yo pudiera desarrollar mi actividad profesional y después tenía tiempo para ser madre. Y bueno, hice mal los cálculos, postergué porque creí que tenía tiempo.
Did you want to have children?
Sim. Gostaria de ter tido um filho há 5 anos atrás. Gostaria. Mas não aconteceu. Mas gostaria sim. Gostaria de ter tido antes. De poder ter tido filho antes.
20代の頃にもっとデートをしてもっといい人を見つけてもっと子供を作るように努力すればよかったと思ってます。
I think if you caught me at the right day in my 20s when I was very in love or excited about a partner, I would say yes. But if you were to pry into that, I might say, oh no, that seems crazy to have a kid in my 20s.
Llegó un momento en mi vida que a lo mejor sí quise de verdad intentarlo nuevamente, pero era...
Yeah, JB's just saying soppy piano music. Yeah, it's the violins are coming out.
Muy tarde, too late.
I just want to get synchronized with my husband, whether our plan, our saying is still on the same page.
Has he answered?
That's so funny. Like the woman's just sat there talking, and it's like the man is just sat there like just being like spoken for, sat there like fuck. She's sort of you know, I don't know. I don't know. It's taking it from a clip, but yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with that.
You yet?
He did not actually.
Do you want to ask now?
Yes. We plan to have children for the fact.
So part 2 is out. Okay, well we might have to do another live stream for that, a separate one. I'll have a look to see if it actually is definitely out, and then we can I'll schedule one. Okay, cool. Yeah, the rest is just credits. So let me get the trigonometry one up. So why is that smaller? Anyway, I'll change it back to me for just a minute. So yeah, that was BirthGap. It was definitely interesting. I find all of this stuff like really interesting. I find demographics and economic development and global trends all super interesting. So I kind of nerd out on all of this stuff. I really enjoy watching this sort of stuff. But my general takeaway from this is that like two things really. One, it does seem like it is something happening in the world that is causing certain people distress, and that distress deserves sympathy. But at the same time, we need to recognize that if we wanted to alleviate that distress in the way that people are asking to, it would mean essentially just creating more wage slaves and bringing people into existence to suffer and die so that you can alleviate your distress, which to me doesn't seem fair or just. The second thing is, hey John and HT who have just come in the chat, and Sundus as well. The other thing is that the framing of this, you first of all have people talking about this as a problem, you know, and the way to address it is to create more people. But surely you could equally take a framing of this is a trend that is happening and we can embrace it and use it as an opportunity to actually improve the world. Now, it does seem like there will be some barriers and issues that you need to overcome, but at what point in history has there been a process of realizing an opportunity that hasn't come with barriers and things that you need to overcome and issues, right? So this is not a unique thing to this. This is uniform across history. So I think those are my two main takeaways from that documentary. I don't know, like, what did other people think? Put in the chat, like, what did you guys think of the documentary? I did genuinely think it was a good documentary, even though I think, you know, what I just said, I think, you know, there's certain issues with it. I thought it was a well put together documentary. I enjoyed it. But maybe I'm biased because I just really like these sort of topics. But yeah, let me know what you people think. What you guys think. So the next thing I wanted to look at was so obviously this guy Stephen Shaw has been published a documentary and then has then been going around and doing interviews with people to try and raise more awareness about this issue. And one interview I watched with him was on this documentary, was on this channel called Trigonometry, who's UK based. They do interviews with people generally around politics and social issues, and they did one with him and I watched it, and near the end of it they actually specifically reference antinatalism. Now we're going to watch this clip, but basically they just don't understand what antinatalism is, and I think they use the term inaccurately. And given that it's such a big audience and it's going to be a topic that is going to become more popular, I think it's actually quite irresponsible for them to have not done their research into terms that they're going to be using, especially when, and you'll see in the clip, they talk about it in such a negative way. So let's go back onto video sharing and we will check this out. Let me just bring it down so you see the whole screen. I don't know why it's changed the proportions there. But before we watch that, let's just see what a couple of people have said in the chat. So Gio's saying that judging by the general vibe of comments on Reddit and YouTube, a lot of young people seem very cynical and filled with doom about the future. The internet exposes the mental health crisis. That's very true. Dee says, exactly, children often a distraction from facing life. I wonder if that is a part of this grief that childless people are having. I wish we could be more supportive of child-free lifestyles. Shuja said that their surprise lab babies weren't mentioned. That is very true. I wonder if they mentioned that in part 2. And Brecken says, interesting take. The futuristic critique on having children suggests an inverse relationship between childbirth and technological advancement and resource scarcity. So I think, unless I'm misunderstanding you there, Brecken, are you saying that if we were to have a lower birth rate, it would be harder to advance technologically and there would be increased resource scarcity? Wait, let me read that again. Having children is suggest an inverse relationship between childbirth and technological advancement and resource scarcity. Yeah, okay, so I think maybe what you're saying there is that it would be hard to embrace it as an opportunity because the declining birth rate would actually impair our capacity to embrace it as an opportunity. That could be the case. That's also assuming that we would want, like, it depends what level of technological advancement you're looking for, right? Like, if we want to get into space and be a spacefaring species, then it may inhibit that. But will it inhibit technological advancement to the point where we couldn't sustain the quality of life and the standard of living that we have in the West today, or even better, with a smaller population? I'm not sure what the answer is to that. Lower birth rate equals higher tech and lower scarcity, more resources, in my opinion. Oh, okay, I get what you mean. Yeah, it's interesting. We'll have to see what the future holds, to be honest. And at the end of the day, none of us here are really going to have an impact on global population trends. So we will mostly just be observers in that part. But it will be super interesting to watch what happens. It's just very unfortunate that a lot of suffering is going to be involved either way. Whether people choose to have more kids or continue this trend. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Okay, let me just check the Discord, see if anyone's put anything in there for priority. Okay, we've got from the Discord, and just so people know, if you want to join the supporter community and get priority, so I respond to all of your questions and they don't get lost in the chat, the link is in the description. So, did they talk at all about microplastics? I've heard some of what may just be a crazy conspiracy about microplastics and making people sterile. I also wonder if added stresses are making people sterile. Yeah, I've heard this. So, well, I'm not sure I've heard about microplastics, but I've definitely heard about like toxins in the environment that have come from industrialization. So they didn't talk about that in this documentary, but I have heard this mentioned in news articles and some interviews I've watched. So basically people are saying that men, I'm not sure if this would impact women, but I've heard it being mainly spoken about men, that men's fertility has been impacted by toxins in the environment that are leaching out of industrial processes. So I realized I was talking to my phone rather than the camera. And that is contributing to population decline. I've no doubt it's to some degree contributing to it if there is a trend of increasing infertility. The question is whether it has a significant impact. Now, in this documentary, he didn't mention that at all. So he's obviously aware of that element because he would have spent ages researching this documentary. So he wouldn't have missed something as big as that. So he clearly doesn't think that it's as much of an issue because the whole, the emphasis of this documentary was on unplanned childlessness as a result of, it seems, people just not feeling ready or it being too expensive seem like the main two things, or uncertainty about the future, about, you know, will my child actually have a good life, rather than we were just going at it and we couldn't conceive. It didn't seem like many people were saying that, which you would, if the main driver or a significant driver was infertility, you would expect that to be much more prominent in a documentary and the interviews they did. So yeah, I'm not sure about that one. It would be interesting to hear. But cool. Let's watch this clip from Trigonometry.
Simple as that.
And do you think as well part of this problem is, and Konstantin has actually mentioned it more in passing than anything else, is society, particularly Western society, is very antenatal. So whenever I hear you talk about South Korea, you talk about, and correct me if I'm wrong, 0.8
Yes.
is a replacement rate in South Korea.
Yes.
I was reading about South Korea the other day when I was researching for this interview. They have child-free zones in, you know, I think it's in the south, in an island in South Korea, and they say no children allowed in coffee shops, restaurants, etc., etc. And then you go, and then you wonder why people don't want kids.
South Korea, I did film there with several people from Korea up here. It's a culture where there are issues, work-life balance, and, you know, women do get paid less than men. There are certain cultural issues you would point to. What's the term that's used in the media is birth strike, but none of the women I actually talked to in Korea were saying, well, I'm on strike. So I think that's a cute media term. The reality is women in Korea are starting families very late, much later than other countries, and they're not achieving the same family size as other countries would do. And Spain's very similar as well, by the way, in terms of the number of people starting families really late. So in those countries, you find very high proportions of families with only one child again. I hadn't heard of the child-free island. I must research that, but it sounds horrendous. And, you know, the antinatalism.
Just before we get into it, someone sent in a tip, and I just want to say thank you. Obviously, I won't mention who it is, but yeah, thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad you enjoy the content.
It is out there.
100% it's out there. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You meet so many people. I'll be honest with you. I used to be like that. Before we had our son, I used to find kids annoying. I do.
Yeah, so for context, Konstantin Kissin here, he's a new father in the past year. So a lot of what I've seen at the moment is him still in the sort of haze of, you know, a new parent sort of vibe.
And I think the fewer of them are around, actually, the more annoying you find them because they become the anomaly. It's like almost everybody's had experience of getting on a plane, seeing a baby, going, oh, for fuck's sake, I'm not going to get any rest, I'm not going to get any sleep. Whereas I think if everyone was having kids around you, it would be a whole different experience because it's like, well, it's just part, like you get on a plane, there's going to be some kids on there because there's going to be some men and some women. It's like part of the thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think there's an awful amount of it around.
Do you know the thing that irritates me most? There's a term used a lot, and we haven't used it here. I don't want to ever use it, but...
So obviously, just to quickly note here, when they've been using the term antinatalism, they basically just mean like against children or against... maybe they mean against birth, but it seems to be that they more mean against children, because they're referencing like child-free zones and like finding kids annoying, which is not antinatalism. Like, antinatalism is, people define it differently, and actually I just yesterday recorded a discussion with 3 other people about what the definition of antinatalism is, so that will be up at some point this week, so look forward to that. It was an interesting one, but yeah, we all agreed on that discussion. I think people generally agree, like, being against children is nothing to do with antinatalism. There are some people who those two things overlap, but if anything, that's just victim blaming. Like, the core of antinatalism seems to be that you're viewing existence as a harm, and therefore children, everyone, but definitely children, are the victims of this situation. And so antinatalism seems to be the opposite of being anti-child. You know, actually taking into account children and thinking, what is the best thing to do? And we've come to the conclusion that the best thing to do is just not to create them in the first place.
It's putting the word child and free in the same...
Right.
Yeah, I call it the CF word. And the CF word is used commonly in the media. It's used in some academia. But the word free means free from something harmful. And the idea that children are harmful. So you put the word free after disease-free, germ-free, debt-free, mortgage-free, things that are universally negative. Not something that you want and you don't want. Not.
I think he's kind of putting a bit too much on that term that isn't really there. I mean, I do agree that X-free usually refers to things that are negative, but child-free isn't that. It just means you are voluntarily without children. Like, they had to come up with a term. Like, what did you want them? You've got childless, but childless usually refers to involuntarily childless, right? You could say I'm voluntarily childless, but that's a bit of a mouthful. Like, child-free just rolls off the tongue. So I feel like he's reading a bit too much into this, to be honest. I do understand his point. Like, if you just look at the term itself, it is like, yeah, the X-free does usually refer to things that are negative, but if you just have if you have exposure to the child-free community, again, some of them will be child hating, but in general, and the term itself is not meant to denote a negative view of children. So yeah, I feel like he's kind of doing too much work here to get this point in. I don't think it actually lands. Oh, why did that not?
Selective thing. So the idea that there's people out there who would use the CF term, you know, as a parent, I find that offensive. The idea that I might want to be free from my children. Or if a teacher in school was saying to my children when they're younger, that they are child-free, what would that do to a child hearing from a teacher? Oh, maybe my parents also want to be free of me. I mean, it's damaging to children. So this is where I see this, well, not exactly subtle, quite obvious antinatalism creeping in everywhere. And I think that term just has to be called out for what it is.
Well, I think on a more positive level, I always try and talk about how much I enjoy being a parent, just to get the idea out there that it's actually a lot of fun. It's not something you want to be free from. It's something, if it's right for you, like you want to make that happen. Yes. So we're going to go to...
Cool. So that's just that clip there that I wanted to share because I thought it was interesting, and they specifically reference antinatalism. What I'm going to do as well is I'm just actually going to check the BirthGap website and see if part 2 is there. We won't watch it today, but we could do another stream. So I'm just going to take a look now. Okay, so I'm on the website. And I do not see a part 2, but to be honest, I'm not very good at doing this sort of stuff whilst on stream. So I'm going to take a look at that when the stream is finished. But that's everything I had for today, to be honest. I found that documentary really interesting. I've already laid out what I thought about it and the things I took away. I thought that clip was interesting as well, and I think it just highlights the fact that people just don't understand what antinatalism is. But yeah, I hope you guys also found it interesting and learned some stuff. And definitely let me know. So this video is going to be available after this live stream is going to be available afterwards as a video. Definitely leave a comment when it's up. Just, you know, leaving your thoughts on what you thought of the documentary in general. What do you think the best approach to this trend of declining birth rates is? And yeah, I'm sure I'll be doing another live stream soon at some point. So I'll schedule one at some point. But yeah, thanks for joining. Look forward to that discussion later in the week. And I will see you all in the next one.